Hi everyone. So now we are continuing with the second session on compilers. So now I would like to explain to you all about the symbol table management. Okay. So the essential function of a compiler is to record the identifiers which are used in the source program. So in my previous session we had seen that there are different phases of compilers, right? So what are the different phases of compilers? Lexical analysis was reading your source program from left to right and it was identifying the tokens. Then it was going to the next phase of the compiler, which was syntax analysis, right? So what was the syntax analysis doing? I'll just take you all to the diagram. Yeah, here it is. So after we have done lexical analysis, it was doing syntax analysis, which was constructing the parse tree and syntax trees. Then the control was going next to semantic analysis, which was doing your type checking of the operands for particular operators. For example, if you are multiplying an integer with a real, then the task of semantic analyzer was to convert that integer into real so that both the real operands can be multiplied. For example, 2.25 multiplied by 2, the answer is 4.5, which is again a real type, right? So 2.25 is a real, but 2 was integer, so integer was converted to real and real multiplication was done. Okay, so semantic analyzer is mainly involved with type checking of the operands for respective operators. After semantic analysis, the next thing that we did was intermediate code generation. We saw how to write intermediate code. After intermediate code was written, the next phase of the compiler was code optimizer. Code optimizer was removing any redundant or not so required steps from intermediate code, and it was optimizing the code. Optimizing the code so that we can do the required operations with as much less memory as possible and with great speed. After the code was optimized, the control was going to code generator, whose task was to generate the machine level program or a target program. So these were the different phases of the compilers, and one common thing that we have noticed in all these phases is symbol table manager. So there is a symbol table which is a data structure that was used by all the phases of the compilers. That's why I have arcs going from all these phases to symbol table. So symbol table is a guy who keeps track or who keeps a record of all the information that is required for compiling your program. I repeat, symbol table is a guy who keeps track of all the information that is required or which is gathered while compiling your source program. Okay, so now let's move on to the symbol table management slide. Here it is. So we're explaining this now, right? So symbol table is nothing but it's a data structure containing a record for each identifier. So when your compiler finds out different identifiers in your source program, it has to be recorded somewhere, right? So symbol table does that task of recording each of the identifiers which are found in your program. And not just the identifiers, but all the information related to those identifiers are also saved in a symbol table. Okay, so along with each identifier, it also saves the attributes of those identifiers, meaning whatever information that is related to that identifier is saved into a symbol table. Okay, so the essential function of a compiler is to record the identifiers which are used in your source program and collect the information about various attributes of each identifier. Okay, so the compiler is going to collect the identifier information also and save it into symbol table. So these attributes which I am saying may provide information about the storage that is allocated for an identifier, its type, its scope, and in case of procedures or functions, the information such as number and types of the arguments, So all this information are the related information related to identifier. So all this information is saved into symbol table. Also, in case of functions, the method of passing each argument types can also be saved. Like you all might know that while passing arguments to function, we can either pass it by call by value, call by reference, right? So what type of parameter passing techniques we are using, that is also saved in symbol table. So symbol table, I'll repeat, is a data structure which contains a record for each identifier in your program, and it also saves different attributes of the identifier. So this data structure allows us to find out the record for each identifier very quickly, because in symbol table data is saved in an organized fashion. So if you want some information, we Google, right? Because in Google information is saved in organized way. In the same way, if the compiler wants some information related to some identifiers while compiling, it goes to symbol table, because in symbol table information is saved in organized way, so that information retrieval is very fast. Okay, so this data structure also saves, the symbol table also saves the information in organized way, so that if you need some information, it can be retrieved very quickly. So storing the information to symbol table and retrieving them is damn fast. Okay. So when an identifier in a source program is detected by the lexical analyzer, the identifier is entered into a symbol table. I repeat, when an identifier in a source program is detected by a lexical analyzer, the identifier is entered into the symbol table. So remaining phases of the compiler gets the information about the identifiers from the symbol table and uses them in various ways. Okay, so that's all I had about symbol table management. Now we'll move on to the next concept, that is error detection and reporting. So now if you again go back to the slide which explains all the phases of the compilers, just like symbol table was used in all the phases of the compilation, error handler module is also used in all the phases of the compilation. So now we are talking about error handler. So error detection and reporting. So when a compiler compiles your program, it also needs to report the errors which are there in your program. Okay, so after detecting an error, a phase must somehow deal with what error has been found out, so the compilation can proceed. So when you compile your program, it should not happen that it just finds out the first error in the program and reports and comes out. But it will be good if the compiler tells you all the errors which are there in your program at once, so that you can fix all the errors and recompile it for the next time, right? So what will happen if compiler just reports one error at a time? You'll be fixing that error, again compiling, fixing the next error, again compiling. So you have to compile many times. And when your program is small, compiling is fine, but when your program is huge, it may take minutes and hours to compile your program. Hence I can't afford recompiling again and again for very small error that is reported. Hence the best way will be compiler listing all the errors in your program at once. Suppose your program has 100 errors, I will expect compiler to list out all 100 errors in one step itself, so that I can fix all 100 errors and I can compile it only once for the very next time, right? So your error detection module have to be smart enough to deal with the error that it has encountered in your program and move ahead, so that all the errors in your program can be reported at once. Okay, so after detecting an error, a phase must somehow deal with that error so that compilation can proceed. This will allow further errors in your program to be detected. Okay, so all errors in a program have to be detected and is to be listed at one time only. So lexical phase can detect errors where the characters remaining in the input do not form any token. For example, in my previous session I had explained to you all different grammatical rules, right? So lexical analysis will find out those tokens. So tokens are identified by a set of grammatical rules. So if there are set of characters in your program but those are not forming a particular token, then lexical analysis will detect that particular sequence of characters as an error. I'll give you all a very simple example. Everyone would be knowing C programming language, right? So in C programming language there is a for loop. In this for loop there is a for keyword, FOR. For is one keyword. So while writing your program, if you just type FNO and if you forget to type R, will your program compile? No, because compiler won't understand what that FO means. It will understand FOR. It understands for as a keyword, but it doesn't understand what is FO. Hence, this is one example wherein lexical analyzer will identify that it's a compilation error. It will say that I can't understand what is FO. So when you type R in your program, when you type FOR, then that error will be resolved and then your compiler will proceed with the actual execution, right? So the errors in which the stream of tokens violates the syntactical structure, it is determined by syntax analysis phase. So after the set of tokens are found out by lexical analysis, the next phase starts with syntax analysis. So syntax analysis, the task of it is to check whether your statement, high level programming statements are syntactically correct. It will draw the hierarchical structure of the tokens and it will identify whether your program is syntactically correct, whether you have not missed out on any semicolons, you have written your for loop in the right way. Okay, so that, because if I write my for loop in C programming language and if I don't follow a particular format in which it has to be written, then definitely compiler will error out saying your for loop syntax is not matching, right? You all might have seen that. So that task is done by a syntax analysis. It checks whether the statement is syntactically correct. Okay. The next phase is semantic analysis. So here in semantic analysis, compiler tries to detect the constructs that have right syntactical structure but which does not have a meaning to the operation which is involved. When I had explained semantic analysis, I made it clear that semantic analysis deals with the type checking. Like if I am multiplying two operands, then it checks whether the operands are proper. Only if operands are proper, it will go ahead. So that statement is syntactically definitely checked by a syntax analysis. But now semantic analysis will check whether the types of the operands are correct. If types are incorrect, semantic analysis will error out. Okay. So all these examples are given to you all to explain how the error detection goes. So if the sequence of characters are not forming a token, lexical analysis will say, hi boss, there's an error. If the syntax analysis finds that the syntax of the statement that you have written in your program is not correct, then syntax analysis will say, hi boss, it's an error here. And if the syntax is also correct but the type of the operands are incorrect, then semantic analysis will say, hi boss, there is an error here, man. So at different phases of compilation, you can definitely encounter errors, and error detection module will report those errors to you. Simple. Okay. Now we'll move on to the next topic of compiler construction tools. Remember, to write a compiler, you need not have to write everything from scratch. You already do have different compiler construction tools. Okay, so after the very first compilers were written, systems to help with the compiler writing process appeared. So very first compilers were definitely written in a very deep way, but after very first compiler was written, there were many tools which were introduced by different guys to help writing your compilers. So these systems have often been referred to as compiler compilers or compiler generators or translator writing systems. Largely, they have oriented around a particular model of languages, and they are most suitable for generating compilers of languages. Okay. So compiler construction tools are as follows, which I have on my slide. So these are different compiler construction tools. I'll explain to you all of this. The first is parser generators. Parser generators produce syntax analyzers. I repeat, parser generators produce syntax analyzers and normally form the input that is based on context-free grammars. So I mentioned that each compiler needs to have a set of rules defined, right? Because compiler is again a software. He is not a human being. Compiler doesn't have mind of his own. So in order to interpret, in order to understand what we have written in high level language, for a compiler we need to define a set of rules. So compiler will refer to set of rules and it will try to understand what we have written. So when we write a C program, a compiler needs to understand what we have written, right? How will compiler understand? For that we have to define set of rules to compilers, saying if so and so thing is found, it's so and so. Okay, so and so operators are operators, so and so operands are operands. If the operators and operands are written in this way, process it in this way. Everything we have to define. So those are set of rules. So in technical terms, those are called as context-free grammars. So context-free grammar is a grammar that is written, which is nothing but set of rules. Simple. So just remember context-free grammar. Whenever I'll say this word in my upcoming sessions, context-free grammar is nothing but just simple set of rules. That's it. It is just set of rules. That means context-free grammars. So context-free grammars are used, and parser generators produce syntax analyzers normally from the input that is based on context-free grammars. So to my parser generators, what is the input? Context-free grammars. So to my parser generators, input is context-free grammars and output is parsers. I repeat, for parser generators, input is context-free grammars and output is parsers, which will help parsing the contents which are there in your high level program. The next tool is scanner generators. Scanner generators automatically generates lexical analyzers, normally from the specification which is based on regular expressions. So for scanner generators, what is the input? Regular expressions. A set of regular expressions are combined and those are given as input to scanner generators. And what is the output? Output is lexical analyzers. So input to scanner generators are set of regular definitions or regular expressions. So regular expressions are input to scanner generators and output of scanner generators are lexical analyzers. Okay. The next tool is syntax directed translation engines. So these produce collection of the routines that walk the parse tree. Just drawing parse trees won't be sufficient, but I also have to teach compilers how to walk this parse tree, right? Just drawing a parse tree won't be enough. I have to also teach the compilers how to walk through this parse tree, and that walking through parse tree has to be given to compiler in the form of a subroutines or functions. So syntax directed translation engines produce collection of these routines that walk the parse tree. So this guy creates the routines that helps to walk the parse tree and which generates the intermediate code. So after I walk through the parse tree, what is the final result? Intermediate code. So syntax directed translation engine helps to walk to the parse tree to generate the intermediate code. The next is automatic code generators. Automatic code generators takes collection of rules that define the translation for each of the operation. I repeat, it takes the collection of the rules that define translation of each of the operations of the intermediate language into the machine language, which is the target program. The name itself indicates code generators. What is the target of code generator? It generates a machine level program, right? So automatic code generators takes the intermediate language and it converts that into machine language. The rules must include sufficient details that can handle different possible access methods for the data. So I need to define a set of rules. I need to provide intermediate language as an intermediate code as an input to this guy who will generate me the machine level language program. So even machine level language program we need not have to sit and write by hand, but using automatic code generators it can generate the machine level program for us. Okay, and the last tool here is data flow engines. So much of the information that is needed to perform good code optimization involves data flow analysis. So only when you will do your data flow analysis properly, you will know which part of your data flow engines are redundant, which part of your data flow engine is not required, which part of the data engine you can improve to improve the data flow that's happening, right? So only when you will do your data flow analysis study properly, it will help you in removing what is not required. It will also help you in removing the redundancy. You need not have one thing repeated at 10 times. You can remove from 9 places and at all 10 places you can make your pointer pointing to the first guy. So it helps you in removing the redundancy. It helps you in removing the stuff that is not required, right? So the gathering of the information about how values are transmitted from one part of your program into another part is very important, and that's what data flow analysis is. To understand how the different values are transmitted from one part of your program to another part is what our data flow analysis is, and with this we need to understand and do it thoroughly. Only then we'll need to or we'll come to know which parts of the data flow engine can be eliminated. So different tasks of this nature can be performed by essentially the same routine, with the user supplying details of the relationships between intermediate code statements and the information being gathered. So different tasks of this nature can be performed by essentially the same routine, with the user supplying details of the relationships between the intermediate code and the information that is being gathered. So data flow engines has to be built properly, which will help us in optimizing the code. Okay. So these are the major data structures which are used in compilers. These are the very important data structures which are used in compilers. So let's explain or let's discuss everything. First is tokens. Whenever a scanner collects the characters into a token, it generally represents the token symbolically. That is, as a value of an enumerated data type. Everyone might have used a enumerator data type in C, C++, right? So enum data type, correct? So similarly, what scanner does is scanner collects the characters in your program into a token, and it generally represents the token symbolically. That is, it associates a symbol with that. That is as a value of an enumerated data type, representing the set of tokens of the source language. In short, tokens is a data structure which is a logical grouping of sequence of characters which collectively mean something. Like for example, if I have F, O and R, F, O and R are three different characters, but when I combine F, O and R into one, collectively it has a meaning of a for keyword in C language. So token is that for. Okay. So when a scanner collects the characters into tokens, it generally represents the tokens symbolically. The next is syntax tree. I'll explain to you all what a syntax tree is. Syntax tree is constructed as a standard pointer based structure. Since it is a tree, it is constructed as a pointer based structure that is dynamically allocated as parsing proceeds. I repeat, syntax tree is a pointer based structure that is dynamically allocated as your parsing proceeds. The entire tree can be kept as a single variable pointing to the root node. So I can save entire tree just with the help of a single variable which is actually pointing just to the root node. Because as soon as I reach the root node of the tree, I can go to any of the child nodes automatically, because each node will have pointer to the next node in a tree, right? So root node will have pointer to its childs, then each child in turn will have pointer to its childs, and so on. So as soon as I reach the root node of the tree, I can reach to any of the children nodes automatically, right? Through traversing. So syntax tree is definitely saved as a pointer based structure that is dynamically allocated as your parsing proceeds. So the entire tree can be kept as a single variable pointing to the root node. Each node in a tree is a record whose files represent the information which is collected both by the parser and by the semantic analyzer. So each node in a tree is a record whose files represent the information which is collected both by your parser and your semantic analyzer. So your parser and semantic analyzer both collect some information, right? Everything is saved in each node of your syntax tree. So the next data structure is a symbol table. Symbol table is nothing but it's a data structure which is used for storing the symbol table, and you can use a hash table data structure for that. So you can use a hash data structure, hash table data structure for storing a symbol table. Because the symbol table will be accessed very frequently for insertion, for deletion, and to access operations which need to be efficient and constant time operations. Hence we prefer a hash table to be used for your symbol table. So I would recommend let's use hash table data structure for my symbol table, because that symbol table will be accessed very frequently for insertions, deletions, and different operations, right? And we need these operations to be constant time operations so that compilation time can be predicted. And various tree structures can also be used, and sometimes several tables are used and maintained in a list or a stack. So sometimes several symbol tables are maintained in a list or a stack. The next data structure in compilers is a literal table. Literal table stores constants and strings used in the program. I repeat, literal table stores constants and strings which are used in the program. It requires quick insertion and lookup. A literal table is important in reducing the size of a program in memory by allowing the reuse of constants and strings. This is very important. By reusing constants and strings, literal table helps to reduce the size of the program in memory. It is also needed by the code generators to construct symbolic addresses for literals and for entering data definitions in your target code file. I repeat, literal table is also required by your code generators who is involved in generating the code. Why? Literal table is required by code generators for constructing symbolic addresses for the literals and for entering data definitions in your target code file. Okay, so literal table just stores constants and strings which are used in the program. Simple. Intermediate code can be kept as an array of text strings. So here we are discussing what are the underlying data structures which are used for these different concepts in compilers. Okay, so intermediate code can be kept as an array of text strings, or it can also be saved as a temporary text file, or it can also be saved as a linked list of structures. So you can save intermediate code as an array of text strings, or as a temporary text file, or a linked list of structures. So next is temporary files. So that's the last data structure. So computers did not possess enough memory for saving entire program in your memory during compilation. Hence, the problem was solved by using temporary files to hold the products of intermediate steps while you are translating or compiling on the fly. So this is by keeping only enough information from earlier parts of your program and enable translation to proceed. So since memory was limited, only enough information that was required was kept in the memory, and other information was kept into temporary files. Okay. So now we'll be discussing the different parameter passing techniques. So let's consider that I define a function. So when I define a function, you always pass some parameters to it from outside, right? So what are the different ways in which you can pass the value to these parameters is what we are discussing now. So different parameter passing techniques. Okay. So in an assignment statement, suppose you write A is equal to B. A is on the left hand side of equal to and B is on the right hand side of equal to. Okay, let's consider this example. A is equal to B. Simple. A is on the left hand side of equal to and B is on right hand side of equal to. So whatever is on the left hand side of equal to is your target of your assignment, right? So when I say A is equal to B, when you're writing a program, what happens actually? Whatever is the value of B, I'm assigning it to A. Whenever you write a program and you write A is equal to B, what it means is whatever is on the right hand side, whatever is the value of B, you assign it to value of A. You assign it to what's on the left hand side of equal to. Right? So whatever is on the left hand side of equal to is called L value or location value. And whatever is on the right hand side of equal to is called R value. Okay. So the term L value refers to storage that is represented by an expression. So in this example, A equal to B, A is L value. So L value refers to storage that is represented by an expression. What is an expression here? A. So storage represented by an A is the L value. So L value refers to storage represented by an expression. I repeat, L value refers to storage represented by an expression. And R value means it is value contained in the storage. R value means it is value that is contained in the storage. So in this example, A equal to B, A is the L value because we have to save the value of B inside A, and B is the R value because the value of B we are saving into content of A. Correct? So when you have A equal to B, the content of B I am saving it into content of A. So we are just concerned with the value of B, but we are concerned with address of A. The value of B we are saving into A. That means we are just concerned with value of B, but we are concerned with the address of A because I have to go there and save it into A. I am concerned with the address of A because I have to go to A, and inside that address I have to save the value of B. So we are just concerned with value of B, but we are concerned with address of A. That's why I mentioned that A is L value, because what is L value? L value refers to storage represented by an expression. L value refers to storage represented by an expression. And R value is just a value that is contained in the storage. R value is just the value that is contained in the storage. So different parameter passing methods are based primarily on whether the actual parameter represents an R value, an L value, or the text of actual parameter itself. So in parameter passing techniques, we are just focusing on a particular actual parameter is a R value or a left value, L value, or the text of actual parameter itself. So I'll explain to you all these different parameter passing techniques now. The first parameter passing technique is call by value. So whenever I define one function, I have parameters to it, right? And when this function have to be called from somewhere else, I pass these parameters, right? So I define the function and I have say 2-3 parameters to it. So when I'm calling this function from somewhere else, I'm passing values to these parameters, right? So let's understand what are the different parameter passing techniques. How am I passing values to these parameters? So first parameter passing technique is call by value. So let's learn what is call by value. So in call by value, the actual parameters are evaluated and their R values are passed to the called procedure. I repeat, in call by value, the actual parameters are evaluated and their R values are passed to the called procedure. So if I have function and if I have two parameters to it, when I'm calling this function from somewhere else, I have to pass values to these parameters, right? So in call by value, from the invocation point, whatever I pass, that expressions are evaluated there and there. And the value, just the R value is passed. So just the R values is passed to the required function. That's why what happens in call by value is, if I modify the parameters inside the function, those are not reflected at the calling point. You all might have write a program, a simple program to swap two numbers, right? So if you swap two numbers in C programming language, and if you don't pass the parameters by reference, or if you don't pass the parameters by pointers, what will happen is, whatever swapping of the numbers that I did in my swap function happens only in that function, but those are not reflected at the calling point. Suppose I have two variables, variable A having a value 10, variable B having a value 20. And when I pass this A comma B to a swap function, but if I pass that by call by value, that swap function will definitely swap the values of A and B inside swap function. But if I just print the value of A and B outside swap function, at the invocation point, A and B are not yet swapped. The reason being, we have just passed R value to swap function. We just pass R value of A and we just pass R value of B to the swap function. That's why whatever changes that swap function does internally are not reflected at the invocation point. So what is the R value of A? 10. What is the R value of B? 20. So this 10 and 20 are passed to swap function. Swap function swaps the values of A and B inside swap function. So that is reflected only in swap function. But as soon as swap function returns the call back to the invocation point, A and B are not swapped, because while passing the values of A and B to swap function, we just passed the values of A and B. We just passed their R values. So please remember, in call by value, we evaluate the expression at the calling point there and there, and we just pass the R value of it. I repeat, in call by value, we evaluate the expression at the calling point itself of the parameters, and we just pass the R value. That's why those are not reflected at the calling point. So in call by value, the formal parameter is treated just like a local name. So the storage for the formal parameter is in the activation record of the called procedure. That's why I mentioned that when swap function swaps the values of two variables a and b, it is only active inside that particular function only. So it's only active in that activation record of that function itself. So the outsider doesn't know that the values are swapped. So the caller evaluates the actual parameters and places their R values into storage for the formal parameters. So who is the actual parameter now? Actual parameter is the parameter while calling a function. Actual parameter is a value of a parameter while calling a function. And formal parameter is the parameter in a function definition. So parameter in function definition is a formal parameter, and parameter while calling this function is an actual parameter. So operations on the formal parameters in call by value do not affect the values in the activation record of the caller. It only affects the activation record of that function itself. So in call by value, we just pass R value from actual parameter to formal parameter. So just the R value is passed to the function. So that R value is only active inside activation record of that function itself. So whatever changes that I do for the formal parameters only happen in activation record of that function itself. That's why these changes are not affected in the activation record of the calling program. For each function, remember, there is activation record associated. So whatever changes that I do when I pass a parameter by value, it is only affected in that function itself, and it is not affected in activation record of the calling program or the caller. Okay, so is the call by value clear? The next example is call by reference. So in call by reference, what we do is the caller passes to the called procedure a pointer to the storage address of each actual parameter. So in call by reference, the caller of the function passes to the called procedure a pointer to the storage address of each actual parameter. So in this example, the same example let's take of swapping two numbers, swapping two variables. So now in call by reference, the caller is passing address of A and it is passing address of B. I repeat, in call by reference, in the caller is passing address of A and address of B. So now I go to swap function. So swap function have received address of A and address of B as the formal parameters. So whatever operation swap function is doing of swapping the content of two variables is now playing around with the addresses. So since it is making a swap of the numbers inside the swap function with the addresses, whatever changes the swap function does internally is reflected in the caller as well. Right? Because in call by reference, we pass the addresses of the parameters. So swap function is swapping contents of A and B, but now he's playing around with addresses. So he goes to address of B, he goes to address of A and swaps the contents of these two addresses. That's why whatever changes swap function does internally is also reflected outside. It is also reflected at the caller. It is also reflected at the activation record of the caller. That's what call by reference is. So whatever changes you do internally inside a function is also reflected outside. The next is copy restore linkage. In copy restore linkage, before the control flows to the called procedure, the actual parameters are evaluated. I repeat, before control flows to the called procedure, the actual parameters are evaluated. So let's understand this with the help of examples in the upcoming slides. So here I have a very simple example for you all, wherein I am explaining the difference between copy restore linkage and call by reference. So just to brief, what are the three parameter passing techniques that we learned just now? First was call by value. In call by value, the actual parameters are evaluated and its R value is passed to the calling procedure. So whatever changes that a calling procedure does, meaning the called procedure does, are not reflected outside. So in call by value, the actual parameters are evaluated and the R value is passed to a function. And this function, whatever changes he did, is only reflected inside activation record of itself. So those changes are not reflected outside, or it is not reflected in activation record of the caller. Next was call by reference. In call by reference, the caller passes the addresses of actual parameters to the function. So now the formal parameters have got addresses of the parameters. So whatever changes that he does are doing with the actual addresses. Hence, whatever changes that a function does internally are reflected at the calling point also. Okay, so now let's try to understand the difference between copy restore linkage and call by reference. So I have a program here. I'll explain to you all what this program is all about. There is a function called copy out, which takes input and which gives output. So in this copy out function, a is a variable which is of type integer, and there is a procedure called unsafe. This function accepts x as a variable. So x is a formal parameter here, okay, which is of type integer. So what is this procedure doing? It has a begin and it has an end. So let's see what this unsafe function is doing for us. It saves 2 into variable x. So variable x is a parameter. It saves value 2 inside x and it saves value 0 inside a. Okay, it saves value 2 inside x and it saves value 0 inside a. A is declared outside in the program, but outside the function. Okay, so this begin and end is of the program now. So this begin and end was of this function only, and this begin and end is of the entire program. So what are we doing here? A is equal to 1 is, I'm initializing a is equal to 1, so 1 is assigned to a. Then I'm calling function unsafe and I'm passing value of a to it. And then I'm just printing the value of a. Simple. I'll again explain the program. Now this is a program in which a is a global variable. That means a can be accessed inside the function definition and it can also be accessed outside function definition. So a is the global variable here. Now in this program I have a function called unsafe. I have a function called unsafe. What is this function doing? It is accepting a parameter called x. It is taking the value of x from outside, and let's see what it is doing inside that function. This one line is the function definition of unsafe. Okay, so it assigns value 2 to this x. It assigns value 2 to this x, and it assigns value 0 to this a, which is declared outside. It assigns value 2 to this x and it assigns value 0 to this a. Clear? So these are the only two things that this function does. Now let's come outside that function definition. This begin and end is of the entire program. So it is assigning value 1 to a, then it is calling the function unsafe and it is passing the value of a. It is passing parameter a to it. So unsafe is defined here and it is called here. Unsafe is defined here, but it is called from here. So I am passing a to it. Then I'm just printing the value of a on the screen. That's it. So I'm assigning a to 1, I'm calling unsafe and I'm passing a to it, and I'm just printing the value of a. Simple. on the screen. Okay, so now let's understand the difference between call by reference and copy restore linkage here. So if we use call by reference, so in this example, if we consider the A that is passed here is call by reference. What is call by reference? Actual parameter passes address. The address of actual parameter is passed to the function, right? So if we call A, or if we pass A by reference, if we pass A by call by reference, the assignments to both X and A immediately affect A. Why? Because in call by reference we pass address of A. In call by reference we pass address of A, so this guy will be having access to address of A. So if I am assigning something to X, that means I am actually assigning it to address of A. So whatever changes I do inside this function definition for X will be also reflected outside. It will be also reflected in A, because in call by reference I pass address of A. Since I pass address of A, whatever changes I will do for X inside function definition I will be actually doing it to the address of A. I am passing address of A as a parameter. So whatever changes that I will be doing for X, I will be actually doing it into address of A. That's why whatever changes I will be doing inside this function definition will be actually doing it to address of A wherever I am using X, right? So if I use call by reference, what will happen? Assignments to X and A, assignments to X, that is this, and A will immediately affect A. So the final value of A is 0 here. Why? I'll explain. We initialize A to 1. Then I pass A as a parameter to this function. So since I am passing by call by reference, the address of A is passed here. So X is pointing actually to whatever A is pointing to. So X and A both are pointing to same memory location now. Now I am assigning 2 to X, meaning I am assigning 2 to address of A, because I am passing address of A now. So A and X are both pointing to same memory location. So when I put 2 into that memory location, A and X both will have value 2. In call by reference, I pass address of A. So A and X both are pointing to same memory location. So when I assign 2 to X, what actually I am doing is I am putting that 2 into that memory location. So X and A both contains 2 now. Then I am assigning A to 0, meaning X and A were pointing to same memory location, right? And I have put 2 inside that. Now when I assign A is equal to 0, meaning 0 is assigned to A, that means to the same memory location I am overwriting 2 with 0. A and X were pointing to same memory location which contained value 2 after executing this step. When I come here, I am assigning 0 to A, meaning now X and A both contain value 0. So now when this function returns, because AND means this function completes, right? So when this function comes out, when I print the value of A, what is saved in that address now? 0. How? Initially it contained 1, but since I pass address here, whatever changes that I do for X also gets reflected in A. So I assign X to 2. So I overwrote 1 with 2. So 2 has overwritten the 1 value. Then I assign 0. 0 has overwritten 2 now. So just there was one memory location. X and A both were pointing to the same memory location. So initially A was assigned to 1. Then A became 2. Because A and X are pointing to same memory location. Then I am assigning A to 0. So at the end result, when I am printing A, I am getting 0. Because 1 was overwritten with 2, 2 was overwritten with 0. So after this function returns back, what we print is A is equal to 0. Clear? A was 1 when then this function was called. Since we pass by call by reference, I pass address of A. So whatever changes I do to X inside this function definition will be reflected outside as well. Hence, I assign X to 2 here. So A, which was 1, becomes 2 now. Then I assign A to 0. So after this function comes out, and when I print A, the latest value of A is 0. So if I print A, it is equal to 0. Clear? Now I'll explain to you all same program, but now let's consider that I pass the parameter by copy restore linkage method. So let's see what we do now. Under copy restore linkage, the value 1 for actual A. Now A is the actual parameter, X is a formal parameter. Okay, A is the actual parameter, X is formal parameter. So under copy restore linkage method, the value 1 for actual A. So at this point, A has a value 1, right? So value 1 for actual A is copied into formal X. So the copy of A is made into formal parameter X. So what is the value of A now? 1. What is the value of X now? 1. Because value of A is copied into value of X. So A is copied into X. So A is 1, but its copy is made. Copy restore linkage means copy is made. So copy of A is made and that is passed. So it's not cut paste, it's copy paste. So when you look copy paste in your Microsoft Word, the initial content is also there and the target location also content is there. I copy and paste. I don't do cut and paste. It's copy paste. So the value is there at both the places, right? Same happens here. So I do copy paste of A. Since I do copy paste of A is containing 1, X is also containing 1. Clear? Then I make X is equal to 2. So what is the final value of X at this point? 2. So value of X becomes 2, which was initialized to 1. Why? Because I did a copy of A into X. So when I did copy of A into X, the A had a value 1 here. So X contain 1. But now I'm making X is equal to 2. So the value of final value of X, which is 2, is copied out into L value of A just before the control returns. So now what I do inside this function, X is having 2. Now I assign A to 0. So A was 1, but now A became 0. So remember, in copy restore linkage, what we do, the first step is we do a copy and then we do a restore. So what is the latest value of X here? Latest value of X is 2. So I copy that back to A. So final, if I print the value of A, it's going to be 2. Try to understand. In copy restore linkage, first step is we copy the value of A to X. Then whatever is the latest value of X inside the function is restored back into A. Whatever is the latest value of X inside the function definition is restored into A. So let's get deep inside this function. A was initialized to 1. So at this point, A is equal to 1. Clear? Then I call the function unsafe and I pass A as copy by copy restore linkage method. So I make a copy of A and I assign it to X. So A is still 1. Now X becomes 1. I create a copy because it is copy restore linkage. So I create a copy of A. So A contains 1, X contains 1. Then I make X is equal to 2 inside the function definition. So at this point, A is equal to 1, X is equal to 2. Right? Then I make A is equal to 0. So now A is equal to 0 and X is equal to 2. Are everyone with me? At this point, A is equal to 0, X is equal to 2. But since I am using copy restore linkage method, at the end of function definition, whatever is the latest value of X, I restore it back into A. Whatever is the latest value of X, I restore it back into A. So when I restore that back into A becomes 2 now. Because what is the latest value of X? 2. So I restore it back into A. So A becomes 2. So if I print 8, it will print 2 on the screen. So let's consider the same example, and I'll again explain to you all copy by value, copy by reference, and copy restore linkage. I'll explain to you all three again with the same example. So see guys, this is a very simple program in which I have a global variable A and I assign A to 1. I call a function called unsafe and I pass A to it and I just print A on the screen. Simple. A is a global variable. I assign A to 1. I call the function called unsafe. I pass A to it and I just print the value of A outside the function. After this function returns back to the caller. Correct? So A is equal to 1. I call unsafe. I pass A to it and after this function comes back, I print the value of A. And inside this function definition, I have x as a formal parameter. And in that I assign x to 2, I assign A to 0 and I end. Simple. I just do these two steps and I come out. So now I'll explain to you all what will be the value of A that is printed here if I pass this parameter by value, if I pass this parameter by reference, and if I pass this parameter by copy restore linkage. I'll explain to you all what value of A will be printed if I pass this parameter by value, if I pass this parameter by reference, and if I pass this parameter by copy restore linkage. Please remember, at the invocation point, I consider this parameter as actual parameter. So this is the actual parameter, and in function definition, the parameters which are there are formal parameters. So this is actual parameter and this is formal parameter. Okay, this is actual parameter, this is formal parameter. So I'll explain to you all call by value first. In call by value, we just pass the R value from actual parameter to formal parameter. In call by value, we just pass R value from actual parameter to formal parameter. That is, we just pass its value. So whatever changes that we do inside function definition are not reflected at the calling point. I repeat, whatever processing that we do for the formal parameters are not reflected at the calling point. So in call by value, A is equal to 1 now. So what's the value of A? 1. I pass A here to this function. So I just pass its R value. So X becomes 1. Then X becomes 2. Then I make A is equal to 0. But since I pass this as call by value, okay, whatever changes that was done inside, now actually I had passed value of A to X. So A was 1 here. So when I passed A is equal to X, X became 1, but X was changed to 2 here. Right? X was changed to 2. But since I had passed just the R value, this 2 is not reflected at calling point. So X becomes 2 only inside this function definition. A does not change its value. But now since A is global and I have made A equal to 0 inside, now if I print A, it will be equal to 0. So in call by value, I just pass the R value of A to X. So whatever changes that I do to X is not reflected outside. So whatever changes that I do to X inside this function definition is not at all reflected outside. So even though I made X is equal to 2, the value of A which was 1 here was not made 2 inside. But since I made A equal to 0 and A was global, if I print A, it's going to be 0. Because A is global. It was not passed to this function. Okay. So in call by value, please remember, I had passed A by value. So I just passed it value to X. So whatever changes I do to X inside is not reflected outside. So even though I made 2 here, that A does not become 2. But now A became 0 because A was a global variable. It was not passed by parameter. It was global. So A became 0. So if I print A, it will be 0 in call by value. In call by reference, I pass address of A. So address of A is passed. So X and A both are pointing to same memory location. So X and A both are pointing to same memory location. So now I make x is equal to 2. So now x and a, which was both pointing to value 1, now it points to value 2. Then I make a is equal to 0. So a and x are both pointing to same memory location. So now it's 0. So if I print a, it's going to be 0. So a was containing 1. Now I passed by reference. So x and a both were pointing to same memory location. So as soon as I make x is equal to 2, 2 is returned to that memory location. So 1 wipes off and 2 comes now. When I make a is equal to 0, 2 wipes off, I write 0 there. So what is the latest value of a when I print? 0. Because 1 was overwritten by 2 and 2 was overwritten by 0. Clear? Last is copy restore linkage. In copy restore linkage, I copy the actual parameter to formal parameter. At the end, whatever is the latest of the value of the formal parameter, I restore it back to the calling point. Simple. So in copy restore linkage, a was 1. So I did a copy of a into x. So as soon as I did a copy of a into x, x becomes 1. Now I make x is equal to 2. So whatever is the latest value of x, I restore it back to a. Whatever is the latest value of x, I restore it back to a. So if I print a is going to be 2 here. Clear? The next parameter passing technique, after we learned copy by value, call by reference and copy restore linkage, after we learned all three, the last is call by name.